I know it's the last session, though. Thank you for coming. I hope this will be useful to you. So to start, I'm an enterprise strategist, enterprise evangelist with AWS. I've been with AWS for about 2.5 years. And 2.5 years ago and 3 years ago, I sat where you're sitting, although on the commercial side. I actually led a transformation of a UK-US business called Experian. I led one of the business units into AWS in 2014 and 15. So some of what you're seeing are my personal lessons, as well as the lessons that we've learned from our customers over the last few years. So this whole cloud thing, right? Sounds like a really good idea. When I took it to our board, they basically said I was crazy. This is too hard. It can't be done. It takes too long. There were lots of reasons not to do it. So I want to share with you, again, some of the things that do work. But know that the hardest part of this is actually not the technology. It's the people and process piece. Trying to transform people, as you all know, because we've done it many times, is extraordinarily difficult. Why is that? Because it's based on cultural norms. Cultural norms evolve over time. Every time you have an outage or every time you have a regulatory change, we codify new behavior in culture. And when you codify behavior in culture, it becomes part of your bone, part of your soul. And it's really hard to transform that. So some of the things we're saying are several cultural trends that are happening in the transformation with cloud. And they're pretty fundamental, right? So there's things around project management, there's things around empowering people, around ownership, who has control over things and who can do things in the cloud. There's this, my favorite thing, I've been in IT for 25 years, and for 25 years I've been catching requirements documents from my business partners, or I worked in the government as well, and usually they're measured in inches in the US. How thick is your requirements document? And then we build something based on that document, and then once we're done, we throw it back over the wall. This is the old way of doing IT. And it's not been particularly collaborative between business and IT or between the government entity and IT, the leadership. And that's one of the things that we also need to change. So what does that look like? What are the outcomes of this transformation? And I want to share with you a book called Accelerate. So Accelerate is a book that was written by a company called Puppet Labs, along with Gene Kim. You may know Gene Kim from the Phoenix Project. And they've taken 5 or 6 years of data just on DevOps. This is not cloud, this is just DevOps, to understand what impact modernizing your IT with processes and around DevOps has. And you see these numbers are dramatic. I especially like the 44% more time spent on new features and code. And why is that? How much time do you spend, roughly, do you think, on just maintaining what you have? Never mind new things. Any guesses? Anybody? How much time? 70%? 80%? Do I hear 90%? I hear 100% in the back? No, 10%. That's really good. Most organizations spend 70% of their time or more just maintaining what they have. And maintaining what you have includes, by the way, the tech museum that we all inherit over time. So if you break this down, there's actually a little final circle in there, so 48%, I think. 48% are categorized as high performers in this study. And out of the total 100%, there's 7% that are considered elite. And the difference between elite and high performers is also dramatic. 2,555 times faster. When you have an incident, the recovery time is 2,600 times faster than a regular business, a regular company. Those are extraordinary numbers. And how you get to this level is with cloud. This is the next level of performance that you can achieve. And why do you want to do that? Obviously, you want to free up time and resources to actually take care of the citizens that you all serve, of the public that is entrusted to you. So how do you do this? What are some of the things? I'm going to give you some high-level ideas around this, then I'll pass it on to my esteemed colleague. and then I'll bring you back to some more detailed things you can do. But the first thing I think you need to think about is what are you trying to solve? What are your business goals? What are your principles around this? So when I went through this process with Experian, I actually created a principle slide and said things like, you build it, you own it. What does that mean? You build it, you own it. That's a DevOps idea. In the past, when I had an outage, and for some reason outages always occur at 2 in the morning, right? 2 in the morning, everyone knows this. Murphy. So 2 in the morning, you get the outage call, and then you spend 2 hours trying to find someone who remembers how to fix that thing. Because we all have documentation, right? Maybe not. And if we have documentation, it's probably not completely current. So we have to hunt down people who have actually worked on that project in the past. And in a new world, you could say, no, I'm not going to hunt anybody. I know who built it. That person owns the maintenance and the operations of the thing that they built. No longer do you get to build something and throw it at the operations team who then has to deal with it. No, you build it, you own it. It's an interesting concept, and it drives a lot of other things. So think about your principles. What are you trying to accomplish, and how do you want to organize yourselves from a very, very principled kind of position? How many of you are using Agile methods and frameworks? Okay, so about half or so. That's good. So Agile's been around for a long time, right? We've been doing, well, in manufacturing, we've been doing Agile since the 50s. The Toyota method has been around since then. And still, IT is still catching up on this idea of iterating work, having small iterations instead of massive products and product timelines, and being able to experiment with small incremental change and fixing it when it breaks. So when I was at Experian, it took me 6 months or 8 months to get a new product on the street. And at the end of that 8 months, if something broke, it was usually catastrophic. And it broke, although I had a large QA team validating and checking everything before we released it. Our customers always found other things that they could break. Instead, if you can break things in 2-week increments in the Agile process, your time to repair is much smaller. You can go a lot faster. So I strongly encourage everyone in this room to embrace Agile when you can. It doesn't work all the time, but it works, I think, in most cases. How many of you are on a DevOps journey? Okay, good. Maybe 30%. That's very good, actually. So the DevOps piece is about removing friction from your system. All right, so every time, if you think of, I'll give you an example. If you think of a price change, I'm from a commercial side, sorry. Think of a price change on a website. So maybe you want to update something on your government website, some kind of a change of language or something, whatever it is. Today, you probably submit a ticket, because you're all using ITIL. And you have a ticketing system, and your tickets have SLAs. And the SLA for us was about 2 weeks for a price change, for a change on the website. It takes 2 minutes to change, maybe. So our engineers, very dutifully, looked at their work log, and they said, the last day of the 2 weeks, oh, I have to do a price change. They made the price change. So I had a 2-week delay because I had an SLA in my ticketing system. That doesn't make sense. So let's give people, empower people to make those changes safely on their own and remove these unnecessary frictions and things that slow you down. DevOps allows you to do that. DevOps is automating everything all the time. And oh, by the way, building in guardrails as well, around your security, around your compliance, around your utilization, around cost. You can build all of those kinds of things in with DevOps. I imagine most of you are project-based today. So what's a project? Project, right, has a starting date, it has an end date, it has a budget, it has deliverables. And what the teams are measured on in project world is the delivery of the project. That's the metric. Did I deliver on time and on budget? That's what we're IT people are rated against. But there's another model that says, let's measure things against outcome. What am I actually trying to do? When you do an outcome-based measurement, You get better ownership. You get teams that are dedicated to that work, the outcome, not the delivery of some timeline. And we do that with 2 pizza teams. Have you heard of 2 pizza teams maybe today, before? Okay. So 2 pizza teams, obviously as it implies, size of a team that can be fed with 2 pizzas. Rest assured, these are American pizzas, so they're actually pretty big. And when you have these 2 pizza teams, they have ownership end to end, right? So they own the roadmap, they own the delivery, they own the operations, they own everything. And that actually gives you some really powerful features because they can drive their own agenda as quickly as possible, and they can work in parallel independently of others, depending on your architecture. So product ownership, if you have product owners, with projects, you're bringing work to the teams. So are you bringing teams to the work? And with product ownership, you're bringing teams to the work. It's a different mindset. It's a subtle change, but it's a very important change. Yep. And this slide is a little broken. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go through this. And when you have product ownership, we see that you get lots of benefits, performance improvements, efficiency improvements. You can actually gate your delivery process around the product and have many small increments and think about funding and budgeting around the delivery of your next phase instead of the end-to-end product. And in the cloud, importantly, and this is why we're doing this, right? You have the opportunity to scale, you have the opportunity to leverage new technologies, you can come up with novel architectures that you couldn't have done before, and you can streamline your process by leveraging services that Amazon Web Services offers that you don't have to build yourselves anymore. So now I'm going to hand off to Jan Willem, who's going to talk us through his journey of going through this kind of a process. Jan Willem?
Thank you.
Thank you. Here you go.
So let's take a look at KNMI, Royal Netherlands Meteorological Services. When I entered KNMI 2 years ago, and they asked me for 4 times during my application project that I would be a redesign IT, I had the impression that there needed to be happening a lot. In fact, the first thing we did was to rewrite an information strategy, and the subtitle I gave to KNMI is a data-driven company since 1854. And if you think about it, when you create a weather forecast, what you need is data from other locations, modeling, and a time extrapolation. That is creating a weather forecast, and that is exactly what it means to be data-driven. How do you do that? We have a lot of sensors. We have a sensor on the Earth. We have radar, especially for clouds. And we have satellite data. And so there's really coming in a lot of data. And how do you create that weather forecast? I will do this very quickly. What you make is a grid of 2.5 by 2.5 kilometers, as we do nowadays. And you make from this grid, you make cubes by doing it also in the vertical dimension. And then you cover the Earth, and then you have a model of the atmosphere. And then you can calculate. So in the basement of our institute, we have our own supercomputer, because you're going to need it. And the trend is to move to even higher resolutions every time. So you can imagine with 3 dimensions and the dimension of time added, the amount of calculations that you need is going to really explode. That you do for this typical weather forecast, in this case on Dutch television. Great weather in next day, by the way. And how bad would it be if we are out of production? Well, for such a weather forecast, you probably can easily miss 1 hour. The general public won't bother that much. We won't tell them, maybe. But we also do it for air traffic. And for example, go back. For example, an airport like Amsterdam Airport, you can't operate without weather forecast data every 5 minutes. In fact, we send messages to every plane leaving or incoming to Amsterdam Airport. And aviation regulations doesn't simply allow to operate an airport of this size without the proper weather data. That's the operations part. We have really critical operations, but what we also have is research. With 400 employees, we are capable of building the instrument of this satellite, Tropomi, which was being launched 2 years ago. What does Tropomi do? Well, it measures the atmosphere all over the globe. We can now, for example, measure air pollution at the size of the red box with the T inside. What you see around is former generations of satellites, but the new Tropomi satellite can, on a neighborhood level, say how air pollution is going. That's interesting. Let me show you one result. This is Europe, as you can see, and you can also see the shipping lanes near Gibraltar, especially in the Mediterranean. And this is nitrogen dioxide in June 2018. This comes out of the exhaust of cars, etc. And this is, of course, really important for policy making nowadays. As I already mentioned, we have in the cellar in the basement, our own supercomputer, and we feed them this machine with models and with the data from our sensor network. And we do this not only once, but we also make some variations in those sensors, and so we create ensembles, as we call them. If you modify the parameters a little bit at the start, you can see here the graphs that do the forecast for the Netherlands, in this case, over a number of days. And the further you go into the future, of course, the larger the uncertainty becomes. Lots of legacy. For quite a few people maybe here, this is Fortran. And we now have Fortran on GitHub because we still produce new code in Fortran. And this was submitted by Geert-Jan van Oldenborg. It's one of our senior scientists and regularly quoted, for example, in The Guardian. That means a lot of legacy, and it means a situation where you have an organization that has both this research that needs to have the possibility to experiment, and you also have these operations. And how can you do this together with guaranteeing your operations, which is of course important, and still creating space for the innovation? It's not just about setting regulations, it's about facilitating both business processes. 20 years ago, the big issue was, can we build all this? Will it perform? Can we do this? Is it technically possible? But nowadays, I would say that the big challenge for me is organizing the IT. It's usually complicated, so the organizing question is everything. We have all kinds of sensors, we have all kinds of embedded computing solutions, we have the cloud with lots of new possibilities, but how do you tie it up, everything together? How do you bring these people with you? Then you need to have an architecture, of course, to guide your organization. And in the past, an architecture meant that you had such a picture of we are now here and we should go there, Ist und Soll, and then you are trying to create that. The problem with architecture is that the rate of change nowadays is so high that if you try to create such pictures, that before you arrive at point B, that the environment already changed and so you will never arrive. What I feel is very important is that you create a space in your organization where you can plug in new technologies and realize new business requirements. What we create is what we call the art of the possible. We provide business a digital platform, and that will drive continuous transformation. The open group, Juan Toledo, they called it the I don't know architecture. Stop trying to make predictions, but educate your people that agility means that you make everything movable, interchangeable. And the rate in which you do that is also dependent on the type of activity. We have this research, very quickly changing, often throw away code, do a proof of concept, harvest the results and throw it away. And we have also our production that needs to be 24/7, highly available. Therefore, we adopted as a guideline the Gartner model, the PACE layer model, where we make this distinction in systems of innovation, systems of differentiation, and systems of records. Of course, our historical climate data, we will never want to lose it. So that is the prime example of a systems of records. On the other hand, in the systems of innovation layer, we want to experiment and we don't want that many rules. But after some decades, we now have quite a few challenges. First of all, we need to renew our infrastructure. We have a lot of our own servers standing in the basement of the institute, and the application landscape is there really based upon old school batch processing, nothing service oriented. And there are new demands coming to us because of internationalization, because of the ambition to become an early warning center. How do we react to that? Everything at the same time? No, in 3 steps. And we are now in the first step, and we will finish this first step by the end of the year. We will lift and shift all our existing systems to the Amazon cloud, the only exception being the supercomputer because it's too heavy. Then we have to implement a new landscape built on the strategy we formulated, and then we will redesign our processes. Why these 3 steps? Well, also because we have to educate people what it means to work in a new way. So first do the migration and learn about the Amazon cloud, and then go on. How does this look like, migration? It started like this. These are our systems, at least part of them, and how are they connected? Well, quite horrible, of course. Documentation, as you mentioned, often was severely lacking, and we had really to discover our own landscape. What can you do to organize the IT? Well, of course, containers are a big help. Why? Because they are so easy to use and people like them to use. In an environment with researchers, if you say you have to do this, it doesn't work. You have to facilitate them in a way that they say, it's great technology, and if you're smart, you do it in such a way that they think that they came up with the idea themselves. That's the very best way. And if we start to think about such a change process of moving to the cloud, you have to realize that often the emphasis is on the planning, the designing, the projects, and the systems. But for every person in the organization, there's a second part of this circle, and that's the undercurrent. They need to have a sense of urgency, otherwise they won't do it. And then they have to say goodbye to everything that was their old way of working, and with researchers, an old way of living. That creates a lot of uncertainty, not knowing where to go, and after that, when they see what is possible, they will enter a phase of creation, and hopefully there will be a new beginning. What makes it quite difficult is that everybody in the organization goes through this undercurrent circle in a different pace. So you have to talk to a person over there who is at the stage, I don't know why this is happening, and someone over there who says the cloud is fantastic and can you facilitate me with my new project, I want to start tomorrow, but you don't yet have a cloud competence center in place to help him. Of course, this creates also uncertainty and therefore sometimes resistance. And that resistance manifests itself in a lot of ways. Students of an art school might say, well, I'm in a process. IT people generally don't do that. They are going to complain, is it safe? It's a US company. This is not acceptable for our customers. We cannot do this. Maybe Google or Azure or something else is better. And there is also some loss, especially in a research institute. We had a famous server, and it's called John's server. And we have Sander. And Sander is the intellectual owner of the Sander blades, which is a cabinet with server blades. I think that it would make a fantastic title for a Swedish movie. But you're taking away his reputation by moving it to the cloud. And it's important to also give attention to that. And what can I, while I'm doing this, what can I already give to Sander back by taking away his old blades? Well, the first thing I can help him is with education. So early in the process, we started with a few days introduction to the Amazon cloud. And for my colleague in the management, there's structure very important. So for every application that we are going to migrate, we have a standard form. It's in Dutch, I'm sorry, about what this application is about, how much it will cost to move it over to Amazon, and how it is with requirements of reliability and integrity, and so on. Then there are also people who find this all fantastic. It's new, so it is fantastic. And so there was one employee in my department who entered my room Monday afternoon, and he said, well, this weekend, the weather station from AliExpress I bought arrived, and I put it in my back garden, and I connected it to a Raspberry Pi, and that I connected to the Amazon IoT pipeline. And here you can see on my laptop, this is actually a photo of his laptop, you can see entering weather data from my back garden, live, encrypted connection, everything okay, production ready, into a database. Okay, great. The rest of the organization still has to start this process. But he's already there. That's good. Also, research departments sometimes have another speed. Docker containers we choose as standard for a number of reasons, but it's clear, it's standard, and you can move it all over the globe. But in a research department, they are often, in the beginning of a project, doing a proof of concept, not that much time, a matter of weeks, and limited budget. So while the standard is Docker containers, they are building like this. What do we see here? A lot of Lambda serverless computing. We see some of those fishes, what is actually the standard, and the rest is not the standard. It's going very well. And what I really like is that they don't program that much. They use standardized Amazon components, they just have to configure them, and that's a big gain. And they gave me the trust that they try it out, and that I know from now that Lambda serverless containers, maybe in production systems, is also a good idea. This is technical, and the next phase, we will have to redesign a cloud-ready organization. So we will get rid of all job titles like technisch beheerder in Dutch and functional beheerder. And we will move to a new stage where we will have an architecture group that's also competent on the cloud. We will have a team that does cloud operations. We will have an application maintenance team. I'm sorry about DevOps, but we have a lot of static applications we don't develop that much anymore. It's a little bit in maintenance. So put that in a special maintenance team. Then we have our systems development, what we will do in Agile. We do that already in Agile, although I call it baby Scrum at the moment, but we will scale that up. Make the move to DevOps in some time. And also move our data science and data analytics team in, because you can better put the data science close to the data and the IT than in the research departments. I couldn't agree more about the shift from project to product oriented, and so we will have product teams on the right that will interface with our end users and with research departments. Some final thoughts. I'm a guy who just starts doing things. And this is really a great adventure, but for you, if you are going to do this digital transformation, take care. Take care of yourself, because you can't really plan this very well. You don't know how much enthusiasm you're going to meet. You don't know in advance in a timesheet how much resistance there's going to happen. So you need to operate very adaptive. But other managements, and maybe the board, are they already that agile? So it will take time for them to react when the circle of your program becomes larger and larger, and in fact you also need assistance. The last few weeks I've been working on this, and so I'm happy to say now that I will get 2 program managers that are going to assist me, because I have to make an apology to Patrick from Amazon, in fact, because for this presentation he called me about 10 times and I didn't call him back. I was very, very busy. There's always a lack in organizing your own assistance, and during that time you have to deal with it. So be aware of what you are doing, but nevertheless it is a really great adventure, and I see a lot of value being created, and that's very inspiring to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Well, that was very enjoyable. Thank you, Jan Willem. That was very interesting. I particularly like you had the slide about the big challenges, right? So one was the organizational structure, and the second was IT, skill, and talent. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So this sometimes feels like you're on a roller coaster ride. When you're doing a digital transformation, when you're doing a cloud transformation, a cloud journey, people are sometimes a little freaked out, like you would be on a roller coaster ride. But there are things you can do to calm everybody down and actually have a fun experience on the roller coaster. You have to think about, again, organizational structure. You have to think through your roles and job descriptions because they're changing. Jan Willem talked about that. You have to think about skills and competencies, training, change management. There's lots of things going on here. We think of the kinds of functions you have to think about in these categories. There's about 15 of them. I know everyone's taking pictures, which is great, but I think you can also get access to the slides after the presentation. So you can actually get a copy of this deck when we're done. But the idea is there are certain things you have to cover down. This is no different than what you were doing before in ITIL. What changes is how you do it. So when you go into the cloud adoption process, when you go into trying new things, right, you are going to discover very quickly that you have some skill gaps. And so this is just a model I wanted to give you. When you start working backwards from the goals, what are you trying to accomplish? Start there. Then think about the capabilities you need to accomplish that goal. Then think about the abilities and the activities that go into the capability. And then finally look at the skills that are required to conduct those activities. So give you an example. Let's say you want to focus on cost management, if that's your business driver, which probably it is, right? You would want to know about reporting. You want to know about monitoring. You want to think about the most cost-efficient architecture you can create, right? So those would be the capabilities you need to enable this goal. To do this, you need to develop a tagging strategy. You have to figure out how you're going to tag your resources. You have to think about how you're going to automate the business intelligence process around this. And you have to think about leveraging what cloud gives you, auto-scaling and other features that we provide. And then from there, you come up at the skill level and you think about how do I build the automation, how do I design the architecture, and how do I actually conduct cost management in a new way. Those are the skills. So once you think about that and you think about where you have gaps, right, then comes the question, how do I fill those gaps? So when I went through this process at Experian, one of the first people I engaged with was our human resource department, the vice president of human resources. And I actually took them to an enterprise briefing center in Seattle because to me this was extraordinarily important. When you're touching culture, when you're touching training, when you're engaging with people, people are afraid. So the HR team should be involved, right? And when you hire people, the new people you bring in should hopefully be already in alignment with the kinds of culture you're trying to create. Because remember, this is about cultural shift. So if you're hiring the same kinds of people you've always hired, you're going to maintain the old culture. Instead, look at people that have the new kind of paradigm already ingrained and bring them on board. You may spend more money when you hire at this level, but that's actually a good thing. I had arguments when I worked for government in the US with my HR team there about they had caps on salaries, of course, as one does. And those caps would get me people who were in the middle tier of skill level, in the middle tier of what they could accomplish. So I told them, look, instead of 2 people, let me hire 1 person that's a little more expensive that can be more effective in terms of the automation process, and I'll save money in the long run. So think a little bit about this idea, how can you bring in the right talent even if it costs more? Outsource things you don't think are core to your business or to your function. And then we'll talk about career maps in a second. Jan Willem also talked about changing the titles. So I had database administrators, database managers when I went through the process. And I got rid of a huge amount of databases and replaced them with NoSQL and with other kinds of tools and systems. So my database engineers came to me and they said, Thomas, we're terrified. Where is this taking me? I don't have a job here in the future. And I told them, yes, you have a job. It's going to shift. You're going to add to your skill set. You're a database administrator, a database manager, and now you're going to be a data architect. Think about data and how it flows through the whole system. Think about how you're going to create the data in a way that your business intelligence team can consume it and create great value from it. It's a subtlety, but it's an important subtlety. So you can actually shift things and keep the people you have and bring them on the journey. When you, again, go through the process, we found through lots of customer interactions that what really accelerates the efficiency of your team is actually getting them certified. And there's this halo effect. If you get 10% of your teams certified in AWS, they will actually accelerate the overall organization because of the water cooler conversations, because of their peer pressure with others. So just 10% will give you a huge lift because the rest of the organization will come along. There's some academic research. If you're interested, send me a note later and I will try to get that paper to you. When you scale your teams, I call it team mitosis. Sorry about the graphic. I'm not an artist. but when you scale your team, right, you start with one initial team. You put in the people you need to do your first project. How do you scale the organization? One way you can scale the organization is you add 1 or 2, my colleague John likes to add 4, 1 or 2 people per sprint into that team. And instead of having a formal training program to bring on board whole formed new teams, you bring in 2 people at a time and let the team train them. It's peer pressure, it's peer evaluation, it's peer programming, and they learn a lot faster. And they actually absorb the culture from their peers much faster than if you were to tell them, you must become so-and-so. And then you split the team. When you realize that you need 4 pizzas for the team, time to split, right? So roughly 12 to 14 people, that's a good time to split the team. Be deliberate about the culture that you want to create. So Amazon Web Services and Amazon as a whole has these 14 leadership principles. Have you heard about them today already? Probably? Okay. I won't belabor it, but the point is, this is a cultural artifact that we've created that we live by. When you talk about, you go to your annual meetings and you have posters on the wall that are motivational posters that are trying to drive behavior. In all the organizations I've worked in the past, and there have been many, those were the only times we looked at those motivational posters in the annual meeting. Instead, try to incorporate that into your daily lives. Pick the things that you want in your culture, and you could take some of these, take some others, and lots of great examples out there, and be really, really deliberate at the kind of organization you would like to become. Jan Willem also talked about how this is not just an IT or development team issue or concern. This really affects the whole organization, right? So when you go through changing things in IT, there are going to be knock-on secondary effects throughout the organization, how you procure things. Your legal team will have to rethink how they do things. Your reporting structures might change. Your business intelligence might change because you might have new kinds of metrics that you hadn't had before. So this change management process really is about communicating to the whole organization routinely and often. I went to my CEO and I told him, we're going to do a weekly video broadcast and we're going to celebrate every time we accomplish something in a sprint or when we accomplish something with the team in the organization. Celebrate early and often. People are afraid and they have to know that it's real, that you're committed, that you're really going on this journey, and you want to celebrate their victories. However small they are, highlight what has been accomplished and celebrate the unsung heroes. How many of you are in operations or have worked in operations? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. When you're in operations, you are the unsung hero. The only time people know that you exist is when things break. 99% of the time when things run perfectly smoothly, you are completely invisible, right? Think about your teams, think about your organization, and think about all those people in your organization that are unsung heroes and celebrate their accomplishments on this journey. Figure out ways to disseminate information, video broadcasts, wikis, have internal mini conferences, allow people, as Jan Willem's developer did, to celebrate and show what they've done themselves. You probably have hobbyists in your organization, people who go to Maker Faire, who play with Raspberry Pi, who do robotics on the side. Those are actually your pioneers. Bring them out of the shadow and celebrate them and show them off and say, look, we built some really amazing things, like a weather station in my backyard that is actually integrated and production ready. That should be inspiring. We should talk about those stories. And then seek inspiration. You're doing it today. You're here. Thank you. If you have a chance, go to reInvent and attend reInvent in Las Vegas in December, first week of December. Because the kinds of stories you hear there and the kinds of presentations you see there are extraordinarily inspiring, like the ones you have heard today. And think about the training process. So I don't know if you talked to our training team today. We have a training program that we can help you set up. We have a training team that can come to your organization. If you want to think about how do I get certified, how do I build a career management plan, a progression plan for my IT staff, how do I find the right course material, come and talk to your account manager and they will help you set up a meeting with our training team, or do it with a partner, or go on our digital platform and look at some of the digital material we have. There's lots of training out there. Make it available. I actually went with a cloud vendor, a SaaS vendor for training before, and I announced to the organization that they could have training, but I didn't just make it available. They had to send an email to me before I gave them access. And the reason I did that is I wanted to see who raises their hand. And once I see who raises their hand, I put them in training, but I also shortlist them for the next team, right? Because they already are motivated. I can see that because they're trained, they want to learn. Make training ubiquitous and available as much as you possibly can. When you think about the cultural change, this is change management. You may not have a change management function in your organization, so you may have to lead the change management function. If you can, maybe you can outsource that. But it is so critical to the success of what you're doing that please don't neglect the step of change management. Identify, like I said, what's the behavior and culture you want. Talk about what that looks like. Demonstrate what that looks like. And then reward the behavior when people actually engage in that kind of cultural norm that you're trying to create. And I already talked about hiring and incentives. And I'm actually at the end of the presentation. So what I want you to take away from this is many things, right? But this line, think big, start small, go fast, this is actually a really helpful metaphor of how to do this. Have a really bold idea. Ask yourselves, what are the things that you want to accomplish but you can't because you have constraints? What does the future look like if you could remove all the constraints? That's your big idea. Then pick something that you can actually do quickly, that's small and digestible. Take that as your first step, and then go for it. Don't overanalyze. Don't spend lots of time in committee meetings. Just pick a workload and try it out on your own. Your teams are extraordinarily capable. That's why you hired them. Give them access and let them go, with guardrails, of course, with guidance, of course. And then go as fast as you can. Go fast by embracing Agile, go fast by embracing DevOps, and go fast by embracing Amazon Web Services. With that, I thank you very, very much for your attention. I encourage you, by the way, to read these books. If you haven't read The Phoenix Project, this is an executive-friendly novel. It's a story about IT. A novel about IT. Sounds horrible, right? It isn't. This is really a fun read. You can read it over the weekend. You can give it to your board members, your leadership teams, and you can demonstrate what this transformation of IT actually looks like, and they will understand, and they'll recognize the characters in the story. When I read this, to my horror, I recognized myself, and I had to rethink how I do things. Think about microservices when you can, where it makes sense, and think about lean methodologies, again, Agile. These are books that were written by the strategy team, of which I am a member. So Mark Schwartz was the CIO of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Department Services. And over a 7-year period, he transformed that US government entity into Agile, DevOps, and Cloud. And these books are sort of the culmination of his thinking. He's a philosophy major, so you have to kind of get through the philosophy part, but it's really fun. He's really snarky and fun to read. Ahead in the Cloud was written by Stephen Orban, my previous boss at Amazon Web Services. It's basically a collection of stories of others who have gone on the journey, and it should give you lots of inspiration of what's possible. And not on here is a book that my colleague Jonathan Allen and I are currently writing, which will come out in the summer, which is actually prescriptive guidance on how to get into the cloud for executives. So at that point, I hope you pick up a copy and read it and let me know how we did and if we need to improve something. So I thank you again very, very much. And I encourage you to fill out the session survey. Thank you so much.